I'm Beth Courtney. Welcome today to LPB's Antiques Fair. Like you, I'm a big fan of the Antiques Roadshow, so we thought it would be fun to bring in some expert appraisers and ask you to select some of your favorite treasures to bring for us to have appraised. We had more than 1,200 of you send photographs from around the state, and today we're going to have 30 appraisals. So we hope to find some treasures, from Tiffany lamps to beds, to silver, to wonderful old photographs. I hope you enjoy it, so let's get right now to the appraisals.
Mrs. Garland, you have a very nice mirror right here. Can you tell us how you came by it?
Thank you. Well, 25 years ago, in 1976, my aunt died, and she left everything to my family, and my sister, Donna's mother, and I took turns on choosing. And nobody wanted that. Everybody wanted other things, and that was the junk. So we called it the junk mirror, and I said, well, I'll take it. So it sat under the guest bed until 1996, for 20 years.
Well, let me tell you what I think about it. First off, I think that it's a Louis XVI style and period mirror. It's in carved pine with a painted and gilded finish, actually a gold leaf finish. It's real leaf on a red ground, a Chinese red ground, and you see the red showing through. Another interesting detail is this sort of sparkly business. The French antique dealers would call it a glace à diamant, a glass of diamonds. But what it really is the mercury silver mixture on the back of the plate is pulling off in tiny little like spots and giving you this sort of sparkle effect. Let's look at the back of it. And first of all, you have some tape on there that needs to come off, but again, we have some straight saw marks.
What do you mean straight saw marks?
Well, they're vertical saw marks that go across this grain, and it is an indication that for sure well, if it would have had circular saw marks, we'd know it would be after 1840, which is when the circular saw was invented. So this is a pretty good indication with the oxidation that this is the real thing. So I guess you want to know what this would price for in a shop.
Junk.
It's not junk. It's good that you brought it out of the hiding place. And if it was in my shop, I would put probably $2,400 on it. So aren't you glad you brought it out from under the bed?
Yes.
Better keep it out.
You've brought in two wonderful Tiffany things today to show us, and I think people would be interested in knowing how long you've had these, why you became interested in them, and that sort of thing. So would you tell us a little bit, please?
Well, we've been collecting for probably 25 to 30 years, and we had purchased some things from a dealer, and he knew what our interests were, and he went to this sale in New York, the Gluck collection sale.
The Gluck sale, as I understand it from the research, was the definitive sale of Tiffany things. It changed the pricing of Tiffany items all over the world. Record prices were paid for Tiffany items at this sale, and fabulous things came up for auction. And you ended up with a daffodil lamp. And I think if you examine the lamp overall, it would be considered to be in just about perfect condition. You have the original finish on the fittings as well as the bronze base. And you told us that the base is signed as well as the shade.
the shade.
Right. I don't want to risk taking it all apart and showing that, but they're both signed. And it's probably a perfect example of Tiffany lamps from that period. Again, it was on the 1906 price list that I found. It too sold for about $100. But I think today these lamps would sell for about $100,000 to $125,000 in this condition. So there you have it.
Thank you.
I think you too.
Now this is a switch. We're on LPB and I'm interviewing you.
I know, I like it.
Beth, what have you brought in to me?
Well, I brought in a photograph that was in a trunk upstairs. It's been in our family a long time, and I think this is my, I don't know how many grades back, but my ancestor, Thomas Worthy, who lived up between Clinton and Jackson, Louisiana, and his widow, Emma Worthy, ended up moving to Shreveport.
Which you wound up in Shreveport.
I ended up, my family was in Shreveport.
And you made it back to Baton Rouge.
Made it back to Baton Rouge.
So you've come full cycle.
That's right, that's right.
Well, let me tell you what you've got. You've got a remarkable piece of early photograph here. This is called an ambrotype. The first photographs were the daguerreotypes. And then they figured out that they could do them on glass cheaper. So they came up with ambrotype, which is on glass. And then later came the tintype and then paper photographs. But each one of these photographs is unique. If you wanted another photograph, you had to take another picture. This is a quarter plate, which is nice. It's a bigger than normal size photograph. But the amazing thing about this one is it's of a, you know who it is.
Yes.
And he's in his Civil War Confederate uniform with his buttons and his gun stuck in his pants to show everybody that he's going to go out and kill all those Yankees.
Right.
You know who he is.
Yeah.
And that makes this photograph more valuable because he is identified. Of course, he's priceless to your family.
Right.
But in the auction world, this photograph is particularly valuable because he's in his uniform, you know who he is, and he's holding, or he has a weapon. All of that combined makes it a very unique and interesting document. With a little more research, we could probably tell what kind of gun it was, what units he served in.
Right.
And those kind of things are the kind of things that really get the blood pumping in the collectors.
Right.
Do you have any idea what that's worth?
I have no idea. In fact, I just found it in my trunk upstairs and thought for this occasion I'd bring it in.
And you said you have more in the trunk?
I have some more pictures,
Whoa. This ambrotype, if it came up at auction, I would say it would probably bring around $3,000.
You were kidding.
No, I'm not.
I feel like, really? I had no idea. Goodness gracious.
It's a wonderful, wonderful piece.
Wow. Well, I can't resist. I know you're an expert in all this, and you've been helping public television with your expertise for a long time. Tell me about, now, have you been involved in any of Ken Burns' projects?
Ken Burns has contacted me several times because he knows that I have the early photographs. And when he did the Irish and did New Orleans, he came to me and got some of my photographs to use for that. And recently in his jazz series, he's used, the only daguerreotype in his book is mine.
Oh,
so I was
that's
real
exciting.
happy that he contacted me.
Oh, well, thank you for being with us, and thank you for telling me that. I am thrilled.
Alan, you brought a really beautiful centerpiece, or Epergne, as they're frequently called, for us to look at today. Would you tell us a little bit about the history of it?
Sure. This was my great-grandmother's mother's. She's from Shreveport. Her name is Mary Gertrude Corbis, and it's an apron that my mom uses as a dinner piece, for certain parties, and she'll put flowers in it and whatnot. We thought that it might be full silver, or that from sterling, or from Europe. We weren't real sure, but we have just a great time talking about it, and of course there's only so much you can pull out of a great-grandmother. So she had her 100th birthday, so that was fun too. And it's just something I've always grew up polishing, and thought we might send it in.
Well, what we did before we went on the air was we took it apart because we couldn't find a maker's mark on the bottom. This is, of course, not sterling. It is plated, but we did find a very, very tiny mark up underneath the central section of the, I guess we would call this the flower horn.
Sure.
And it's marked Derby Company. Derby Company is an English firm in Birmingham, England, that made this, but the Derby Company was acquired by International Silver. So actually, this was probably made by the Derby Company for retail. Now, on the basis of its style, I think it would be safe for us to say this was made at the very tail end of the 19th century, or right at the beginning of the 20th century, which fits in just fine with your family history on the piece. On today's market, I would think this piece would probably be worth in the neighborhood of $1,000 to $1,500 because of its size and its beautiful design. It has, I think, been replated. probably done by your grandmother,
Right.
Before she gave it to your mom, because it's copper, little copper was showing,
Sure.
So, but that's all right, and it looks very nice, and I think really a very handsome piece, and you can certainly make a spectacular display on the dining table that everybody will be wowed by when this thing is all decked out with flowers out of here, and I suppose sweetmeats or whatever down in here. So again, thank you for bringing this piece in.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate the information. This is it's going to thrill my mom and of course my great-grandmother. When she sees this, she's going to want it back.
Yeah, probably so. Probably so.
Well, Martha, you came all the way from Atlanta.
Yes, I did.
And carried this vase with you to bring it to us today. So that's pretty important. The thing that strikes me is when I was told that I was going to appraise this, I was also told that you referred to it as the ugly vase.
Yes, I do.
So why don't you tell me how it got that name and a little bit about how you came to have this?
Well, my mother gave me this, and I, of course, refer to it just as my mother did, as the ugly vase. And it had belonged to her aunt, and when she passed away, it went to Mom. And so I guess about a year ago, Mom gave it to me. And she's like, oh, I just want you to have the ugly vase. And there's just so much going on. It's got dragons, it's got flowers.
Exactly.
That's kind of why we refer to it as the ugly vase.
But I know you mean that in a very endearing way.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. Is there a second one or another one that's a mate to it?
Not to my knowledge. This is the only one that we have.
Okay, well, it was probably originally a pair. Probably would have been a second one.
Okay.
And I believe it's French. And they would have been purely for decoration. This vase didn't do anything. It didn't hold flowers, absolutely nothing. It was strictly here just to be a decorative object. And the pair of vases were probably meant to be on a mantle with a big, maybe French over mantle mirror, because they're the same front and back. So on the mantle in front of the mirror, you'd see one side, and then the mirror would reflect the side to the back that was the very same. It's a great piece with just a lot of personality. So
it does have that.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought it in, and maybe y'all shouldn't call it the ugly vase anymore when I tell you that. Well, let me ask you first, do you have any idea what it would be worth?
I really don't. I really don't even want to speculate.
Well, like I said, you may not want to call it the ugly vase anymore because I believe it would be valued at about $500.
Oh, wow.
Which is not too bad for an ugly vase.
For an ugly vase, that's
right.
Good. That's right.
That's right. Well, I hope you take good care of it.
I think I will.
And enjoy having it for many more years.
Jack Kerfus, you brought some wallpaper in for us to see. This is from the Civil War.
Correct.
Would you mind tell us?
Well, it came through the family from a great-grandmother back when, and it was given to her through, as it says on the back side there, Lieutenant Buskirk to his daughter, Hattie Mason.
Well, Jack, this appears to come from the Civil War. When I first saw this, I noticed that this particular pattern of wallpaper looks like it comes from an era called the Arts and Crafts era, and a decorative art specialist will tell you this hand-blocked wallpaper may have come from England around 1880, and this presentation is 1892. I think, let's go back to the front. It seems as if the lieutenant was in the Civil War. We've talked on the telephone. We're not sure if he was at Vicksburg. The Vicksburg page of wallpaper occurred when Mr. Swords, who is the publisher of the Citizen, ran out of newsprint. There being no newsprint, he used wallpaper. And thanks to the Library of Congress and some very nice guys at the reference section of East Baton Rouge Parish Library, I got in touch with a fellow who owns most of the copies and owns most of these original pieces. He lives in Tennessee, and he told me that on the third column, 6 inches down, where it says, "It is thought General Rhodes," Mr. Swords was in such a state that the Civil War was upon him that he inverted the E of General Rhodes. The true copies are all with that small E inverted. Well, I tell you what, it's a wonderful document. It has provenance. It's been in your family for a long time, for the entire era. I'd say because of this wonderful frame, but it's a copy. Because of the wonderful frame and the provenance, I'd say the value of this is around $300.
Good deal.
This is a beautiful Navajo rug. It's a flat weave like the kilim rugs. The tribal people, they did very light their rugs because it was easy to carry them around if they had to move from one place to the other. It's a beautiful rug. These are our Picassos, I call, because it's really, I mean, they should be hanged. I see that you have done over here a binding on the back and the hanging loops. I don't suggest that this rug should be hanged on the loops. It should be just get a rod and slide it in the back and hang it the proper way on 2 spots so that the weight of the rug will be distributed evenly and it won't have any sagging. The hanging system is the best solution you have done on this. It's a, where did you get the rug? Can I ask you that?
My grandfather had a summer home out in Cripple Creek, Colorado, about the turn of the century. And they traveled around into Arizona and New Mexico when they were out there. And then it came through him to my mother, and now it belongs to our daughter.
Right.
Here, so, and she has put it on the wall. It was in our bedroom. My brother and I shared a bedroom, and we had a dog and all of the usual criminal acts that you can do to rugs were done to this one.
Well, they are made for that.
That's right.
You have to enjoy it and all that.
But we've enjoyed it, and she's enjoyed it in her home.
Sure. This is great. Everything has a lifetime. You know, this is fiber material.
Yeah.
And even if it's hanged on the wall, you have once a year, I suggest that you check up. You take the rug down, check up on the back, take it to the outside, put it under the sun. Sometimes the moths, they can come from the back of the rug and start eating it when nobody is bothering them in the darkness, that the wool creates that. So you have to be careful to check up on that, you know. I was going to ask you what you think the rug like this is worth it.
I don't have the slightest idea.
Well, there has been many rugs in the small and large. This is pretty good size, large size rug. As I say, it's all vegetable dyes, and there is not another one like that. Even the weaver, if he did another one, it was never the same. So I guess historical value, this thing should be worth it around $1,000, $1,200, you know. It's a very pretty one. Just hang on and pass it the generation after generation, you know. We can enjoy it and take care.
We'll certainly do that. Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome anytime.
Mr. Major, you've brought in a very interesting dance certificate. Could you tell us how you came by its ownership?
Well, the dance certificate belonged to my great-grandmother, and it was stored for years in a trunk in my grandmother's house.
Well, for me, it's a very interesting thing in so many different ways. The first thing that I think of is the fact that it has Napoleon, his son, the King of Rome, and Marie-Louise at the top. And the date at the bottom of this document is 1830, when Napoleon was dead by 1821. So that it's almost the equivalent of having me giving you an award today and putting President Kennedy's picture and, you know, Jackie and the children at the top. It just doesn't fit. The other thing that's pretty interesting about it, or maybe even bizarre, is it's all trapped in military kind of symbols and images, and this is a dance certificate.
Right.
As far as what something like this would be worth, I would think it would be worth somewhere above $2,000. If it would turn out to fit into some sort of sequence of things that was done by some specialist, it could be worth even more than that.
Very good. I appreciate that.
Well, you're so welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing in such an interesting piece.
Thank you very much.
Would you please tell us who these people are and why you've brought them in to us today?
This is a picture of my grandparents, my father's mother and dad. It was taken outside of New Iberia, and front steps of their home. And they died before I was born, and I think it was taken before 1929.
Well, how did you get this picture? Did they give it to you?
I got it from my father. It was in his house, and he gave it to us.
And did he remember anything about when this picture was taken? Or that
He never mentioned it.
I think that you have an outstanding example of photographs of people through the countryside taken by itinerant photographers. They traveled through the countryside in buggies and wagons, stopping at people's houses and photographing people who were interested in that sort of thing. The wonderful thing about this one is it was taken outside your grandparents' house. More often than not, the photographers would set up a studio in the room of a house in a town, and people would come and have the photographs taken in this set-up studio. But I believe in this case, the photographer has stopped at your grandparents' house and taken them sitting on their steps. Then, once the photograph was taken, the photographer sent the negatives to a processing plant in some city, and the photograph was touched up by different artists and then shipped back to the photographer, and he either delivered it to your parents or the grandparents or the sitters, and then in other cases it was mailed directly to them. Unfortunately, not too many of them survive, and I think you're very lucky to have one where you know who the sitters were, where they were, and when the thing was taken. And I know that this doesn't have a high monetary value, but as far as sentiment is concerned and historical value, it's priceless. I think if someone were to buy this today, they're more concerned with the value of the frame and the curved glass, and I think they pay about $125 just for the frame. So you're lucky to have that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we're so glad to see you and this incredible bed, and these ladies get the credit for bringing the largest single piece of furniture that is in this edition of LPB's Antique Roadshow. Well, I think that the person gets to sleep in this bed is going to be very privileged. George Washington didn't sleep in it, but it's pretty swanky. This bed is what we call an aesthetic movement bed. Some people use the word Eastlake after Sir Charles Eastlake, who came up with these designs of having the incised lines that you see all over this bed. But this bed was a deluxe piece when it was brand new. And you can tell it by the amount of work that has gone into it, and also the materials that they used. And I'm sure when you all went to the auction and bought it, you were very attracted by the fact that it's got bird's eye maple. This wonderful panel across the center is rosewood. And then all of the incised lines have been gilded, and they have ebonized some kind of lesser wood to make this black appearance here. Same thing happening in the moldings around the edge. And then, of course, the top is just delicious too. All this beautiful walnut, and again, the incised line decoration and the gilding. The other thing that I think is pretty exciting about this bed is the fact that not only is the headboard and the footboard completely carved, but if we could whirl this thing around, the back of the bed is completely decorated as well.
Right.
So this tells you something. What?
Very fine bed.
Very fine bed, she says. Well,
that it could go in the middle of the room.
that it could go in the middle of the room or come out, be actually pushed up against the wall where you could see it from both sides.
Right.
So this was giving you a multiplicity of places that you could use this bed, and it's just a beauty. And what do you think it's worth?
Well, depends on who's interested in it. No, we really don't know.
They're hemming and hawing. I think that this bed at auction or in a good shop could go anywhere from $5,000 to maybe $9,000.
Right.
It would be even more exciting if you all can go back to the shops and find the companion side tables and linen press and the dresser and all the things that go with it. But even at that, this is just a knockout bed. I mean, this is not the kind of the bed that you come in and don't look at when you go in the room.
It gets your attention.
So with your future bed and breakfast, I think that you will definitely get their attention with it. And thank you ever so much for indeed bringing the thing down.
Thank you. We appreciate it. We've enjoyed our day.
Good, good.
Ms. Rector, you brought a Wallace Nutting photograph to us today. Tell me what you know about it.
It was my grandmother's, and it had come to her from her mother-in-law, who would be my great-grandmother, and from New Hampshire.
What was her name?
One of these unusual names, Johnson.
Very unusual.
Yeah, and the grandmother was Smith before she was married, so poor thing went from Smith to Johnson.
Well, do you know much about Wallace Nutting?
No, I don't. Please tell me.
He's a very interesting man. He was born in 1861 in Rock Bottom, Massachusetts. And in about the turn of the century, he decided that America was disappearing. The America he knew and loved was going to be gone. So he started collecting old furniture. He actually collected old houses. And one of the other things he did was he went around the country taking photographs that were intended to show what life was like in the colonial days. And you've brought us one of those today.
Okay.
This is a photograph, and they were mass-produced. There were millions of them made. But the thing that I like about yours is not only are they hand-colored, as all of them were, but also on this particular one, he's got the name, which is the treasure bag, and the signature Wallace Nutting. Now, on the back, turn this around, and there's the original backing that was on the photograph, the sticker from Jordan Marsh Company, where I guess you're...
St. Johnsbury, Vermont.
In St. Johnsbury, and your grandmother's name. This has come down in your family, is that right?
Yes, yes. It hung in her house, and then hung in my mother's house, her daughter-in-law, and now it's in my house, and I'll give it to a granddaughter one of these days.
And it'll stay in the family.
It'll stay in the family, yes.
It's very, very nicely framed. I notice it has a reproduction frame and a nice matting on it. I have to tell you that the photograph itself would have probably been worth more money if you had left it in its original frame, because collectors look for things like that. But I certainly understand why you would want to have had it framed and matted so attractively as you have. Do you have any idea of how much this particular photograph might be worth?
I don't.
Well, in today's market at auction, I would estimate that this photograph would probably bring somewhere in the $200 to $300 range. And in addition, I know you've spent money to have it matted and framed, and that's a very nice, attractive feature that I know will preserve it and keep it passed on down to your family for generations to come.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for bringing it in to us today.
Thank you.
Could you tell me about how you acquired this piece?
Well, this piece was presented to my husband's great-grandfather upon completion of a project in Texas. There was a Mr. Sam Hing, who was a labor contractor who supplied workers when the Southern Pacific Rail line was laid in, I don't know what part of Texas. And my husband's great-grandfather was in charge of the American workers. And upon completion of that job, they exchanged gifts. Mr. Hing presented great-grandfather Noble with 2 of these, and I have no idea what great-grandfather Noble gave to Mr. Hing. I really don't know. We just, his family gave them to him. They've had them since the, late 1800s.
And you have a newspaper article about...
Yes, this article talks about some of the Chinese laborers who settled in Texas, and this particular one is announcing the birth of one of Mr. Hing's sons, and I don't know how many children he had, but it's... and I think there were 3 articles written about these workers and how they went on to do quite well, you know, after the railroad construction job was finished.
Do you know anything about the piece?
Nothing at all, except that I don't even know where the other one is.
Okay, it's Japanese Amari, and it's mid-19th century, and we can see the signature on the bottom. Now, do you have any idea of the value?
Absolutely no idea.
Well, of course, in this condition, the value is not as high as it would be if it were in perfect condition. But in this condition, they would be worth about $400 to $600 apiece.
Oh, good.
Well, this is my dear neighbor, Elise Rosenthal, who's dragged in this dirty old silver. So would you be good enough to tell us a little bit about it first?
Well, this sugar and creamer were a gift to my husband's mother when she married for the first time, and I think she got married in the 1880s at some point, late 1880s, and her parents gave her this set as part of the wedding gift. And when my husband and I were married, she gave it to us, and I have treasured it ever since. And it's got her initials on it and her mother and father's names saying who it was given to. And it's American coin silver as far as I know, Pat.
You're absolutely right. And what's so interesting is, of course, the engraving was put on later. This service is American coin silver, as you know, and much earlier than this presentation inscription. Gerardus Bogardus, who made this set, was working in New York City by 1814. On the style of this, I'm going to say that this was probably made in the late teens of the 19th century, or say 1820, 1825. And originally, of course, it would have been a part of a larger service. There would have been indeed a coffee pot and a teapot, and perhaps even a waste bowl, which in those days they would have called a slop bowl.
Yeah.
So probably there had been a division in the family a generation or two before you all received this as a gift. But what an absolutely handsome gift of silver.
Oh, we've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it for a long time.
Do you have a clue as to what it's worth? Not really?
No. You appraised it 20 years ago.
So what did I appraise it for 20 years ago?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Well, I think probably this set, it's large and imposing, of heavy weight. Probably today we're going to say in the neighborhood of $3,000 for the 2 pieces, but priceless as family heirlooms. And we know that you're going to give this to your daughter, so it'll go down to yet another generation of your family. And thanks ever so much for bringing it in.
Well, thank you for appraising it, Pat. I appreciate it, even though it's dirty.
Okay.
The person who owns these baskets couldn't be with us today, but they were so interesting we asked her to send them in so that we could talk about them anyway. They were probably made by the Coushatta Indians in Elton, although members of the Tunica Biloxi tribe made baskets like this as well. I think that they probably date to the 1950s, because when I was a child, some of the Coushatta people camped out in one of my old cousin's cow pastures, and I remember visiting with them and buying these little baskets for my mother and my grandmother, and they were 25 cents each. My mother still has hers, and it's almost exactly like this. The basket is made out of longleaf pine needles, and the lid is decorated with colored raffia, and the sides of the basket are decorated with raffia as well. And I think the lady who owns these said she paid 50 cents for these at a yard sale in North Louisiana. I've seen these recently in shops for as much as $85. I think some for around $65. So I think she was pretty smart to buy them at 50 cents and hang on to them and send them to us, don't you?
Tell us how you came by this table.
This was in the same aunt's house, and we don't know anything about it other than I thought it was pretty, and when it was my turn, I chose this.
Well, you made a very good choice here, and a choice that is actually a bit difficult for me to decide whether it's a 19th century copy or a real Louis XV 18th century piece. It is a typical Louis XV style petit meuble, a little piece of furniture that would have been expensive when it was new, put in the living room or some fancy salon next to an equally fancy chair. Your table is particularly well constructed and well done. The legs are not only cabriole legs, which are difficult in themselves to cut out, but the surface is a concave and then veneered with this sort of chevron pattern of mahogany from the West Indies. The underside of the table shows some similar straight saw marks with a little rocking motion to them. So to me, they are indicating that this would be an 18th century piece rather than a 19th century
And what
piece.
are all these little holes?
Those are powder post beetle holes that were munching on this table at one point. But they don't look like they've been munching lately, so I wouldn't worry about that. The top is done with marquetry and very well executed. If it was done in the 19th century, it was done by a master ebonist, not a carpenter building a country French table, but a real schooled ebonist who would have gone to school and learned how to do veneer, learned how to make rabbet. This is all stuck down with rabbet glue and presses. They would have had very complicated presses to press the veneer onto these legs with those concave and curving shapes. So it really is quite a treasure you have.
Inside the drawer, it's quite dark.
It shows a good deal of oxidation, and it is another indication of the age of this piece. Certainly it wasn't late 19th century. It could be from the 1850s, but what I would say my gut instinct is it really is from the Louis XV period. Now, of course, you want to know how much this might sell for. Well,
I'm not going to sell it.
As a 19th century beautifully executed copy of a Louis XV thing, it would be worth maybe about $5,000 at that. But if it is truly what I think it is, it would be worth maybe 3 or 4 times that amount. So it's potentially a serious piece of furniture that you came by.
Goodness, her mama always tells me I got the best things.
Hi, Janice.
Hi.
You brought this chair in for us today. What do you know about this chair, and where did you get it?
This is my mother's chair. She acquired it at an estate sale, and she doesn't even remember how much she paid for them, but there are 2.
It's a pair, a match pair. They're exactly alike.
Well, they mirror. This one is, this is on the opposite side.
Oh, all right, I see. Okay. Well, what you have here, this is an English Regency period chair, and the Regency period was from like 1811 to 1820. This chair was probably made in around 1825 or 1826, so we'd actually call it a late Regency chair. One of the things that we can look at to help us identify it as that is we can look right up here. This is called a crest rail, this big broad piece at the top of the chair. The crest rails in the Regency period extended way over these side uprights like this. Another thing that we would look at would be the seat rail right here. It's really deep and it's molded, and that's how they presented those in the Regency period as well. And these legs are full and tapered, another feature of the design of the Regency period. Do you have any idea what they'd be worth?
I didn't even have any idea that it was that old.
You didn't?
It's much older than I thought it was, because we have a lot of grandkids that go through Grandma's house, and they're not off limits, it's not treated with kid gloves.
It's being well used, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, if this chair wasn't missing these pieces, if it was in perfect condition and had all its parts, one individual chair would be worth about $600 to $800. Missing these little parts right here, which you could get replaced. You could have those made and put back in, but like it is now, probably worth about $400 per chair.
Well, Mrs. Skipper, could you tell me something about how you came to own these books?
Well, I first saw them in an antique show in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I have loved books always, and I always pick them up when I see them in a place. And the dealer showed me how you open them up to see the painting on them. And then since then I've read about them.
Why don't you show us this? This is a fore-edge painting?
Fore-edge painting, F-O-R-E, you know, the four edges. They're always painted gilt first, and then you put them down and you lay them down very gently like that and kind of spread them out.
And there you have a golf match going on.
Yeah. See?
Now, you showed me something about this earlier, that this is a very special kind of fore-edge painting because it's not just one.
No, this is what they call a double one. See, and you turn it painted one way, and how they do it, I don't know.
So you've got men playing golf on one side and women playing golf on the other. That's very nice.
Most of the books were done for just to keep, but not. They don't have anything to do with what's inside of the book.
Sure.
Some of them do,
but
a few of them
they
do.
were gift books.
Gift books, mainly.
And this one you can see was given to a woman's husband from his affectionate wife in 1861.
Yes, they're all in they became very popular in the late 19th century. They first did them in around the mid-17th century, I think, is when they began.
Yes, I think 1649 is the earliest known one that was actually dated.
Some of them.
Do you have any idea what these are worth?
No,
you've been collecting them.
I've never bothered about it. They're in my library to stay, and I would like to know them. Surely.
Well, I did some research on these, and I think in today's market, what I've found is that most of these books sell for between $700 to $800, and so they're certainly the larger and the older ones, and of course it depends upon what the book is as well. But I think a good ballpark figure for these is $700 to $800 each.
Well, that's fine. Lovely. Glad to know.
We had purchased some things from a dealer, and he knew what our interests were, and he went to this sale in New York, the Gluck collection sale, and he purchased the mirror, and he called us and asked us would we be interested, and we said yes, and he says, well, I can meet you in Baton Rouge with the mirror. So we met him in Baton Rouge with our money and he with the mirror, and we ate supper together, and he flew back to New York.
And you ended up with this bronze mirror, which has a peacock feather design all over it, the base as well as the back of the mirror itself. And the eyes of the peacock feathers are made out of glass, Tiffany glass, set in a mosaic pattern in there on the tips, or the centers of the feathers, rather. And then, if we flip the mirror over, we can see how beautifully finished the back of it is as well, which is typical of all of Tiffany's things. They were beautifully constructed and beautifully designed. In fact, he paid top-notch artists to design all of these things and excellent craftsmen to execute them. The records show that in 1906, when Tiffany had this mirror for sale in New York, it would have cost you $100. The records also show that in 1979, was it, you said, at the Gluck sale, this mirror sold for $16,500. I think today, were this mirror to appear for sale again, a person would expect to have to pay at least $75,000 to $95,000 to get it. So there you have it.
Pam, you have brought two fun tables in for us to look at today, and frequently in antique collecting, the stories of how you acquired the things are almost as fun or more fun than the actual objects. Would you like to tell us a little bit about how you got these things?
Right. Well, we were lucky enough to live in Brussels for a couple of years, about 20 years ago, and we went to a big antique fair one weekend in Brussels, and we actually saw this table here because there was a dealer from Amsterdam. My husband was not quite convinced that the table was a good deal and that, you know, the repairs were well done. So I worked on him for a few days, and we actually, a few weeks later, went to Amsterdam, saw the table in the shop, and purchased it then and brought it back with us. This table comes from a shop in Little Rock that we bought just a few years ago. We were shopping with our children who are grown and married, and we tried to convince them to buy this table. We couldn't convince them, so we just couldn't leave it. So my husband and I bought it and brought it back to Baton Rouge.
There you are. Well, needless to say, this table is American. This table, even though purchased in Amsterdam, is indeed an English Georgian table of probably the latter part of the 18th century. This is a tea table. This would be considered a candle stand. And of course, what we want to do is look at the condition of the piece. And your husband had good reasons for saying he wouldn't really want to buy this piece because of some of the repairs. Two of the feet have been repaired. Nasty little repair back here in the back, but it does have this beautiful column, this pillar, is what they would have called it in the 18th century, 19th century, and it has this lovely spiral knop here in the middle. However, this piece has had something that did bother your husband, and bothered him correctly so. We should have dovetails. The whole leg from here all the way up through the dovetail should have been carved as one piece. So we're going to probably be very conservative and say 900, 1,000, something like that on this one. But we're much more excited about the humble little table that Mrs. Wall, I have to tell you, did not want to bring to us today, and we had to convince her to do it. This table is just generically American. It is mahogany. It is what we would call a little Sheridan or Hepplewhite style table. Nicely turned column. Because it's mahogany, I'm going to kind of guess that it's very likely that it came out of New England. It had a split here, and this had this little patch done, or this metal brace applied to keep the two pieces of the top together. Actually, the top is one solid piece of mahogany, which you don't get today. But what really is nice about this table is, unlike the other one, notice that here is your whole leg. From here to here, there is that dovetail, just like we want to see them. And I would say that this table probably would sell in a shop today for more in the neighborhood of $1,500, and I'm much more excited about it than I am about this one. And we thank you for bringing both of them into us today.
Thank you. I enjoy them both. So.
Good. Equally, probably.
Right.
Okay, good for you.
We have two very interesting kitchen objects here. Can you tell me how you came into the ownership of them?
In the mid-'60s, we was in England, and I picked them up there.
Mm-hmm. And what, you bought them at a flea market, or how did you find them?
Like a barn sale, they call them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in a box that we purchased.
This one is a sugar nipper or sugar cutter, and it's 18th century. It's hand-forged steel with some nice file marks on it there, and it does have two defects to it, I have to tell you. One is that the spring, which was originally mounted in here, has been broken off short, so it no longer operates with a spring action. Then this is part of what had a little bit more of an extension on it and a hole, and that would have closed over and hooked onto this little part to keep it closed when you weren't using it. This is a typical 18th century tool that was used to take a sugar cone and snip it down into smaller pieces that you could use for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or whatever. And would have been done by a very qualified blacksmith, somebody into making tools, because to get the sort of fit that you need with this sort of joint, it wouldn't have been somebody that would have just been talented enough to make, let's say, strap hinges or something. This was somebody that was making medical instruments or tools of various sorts. Now, if this was in perfect condition, it would probably be worth about $250, but because it has the two defects of age, it would be worth somewhat less than that.
Yeah.
What you have here is just a beautiful English transferware platter, and I'm thrilled to see it because this is of personal interest to me. I love transferware, and I've been collecting it for years myself. So I'd love to know how you came to own this beautiful piece.
It belonged to my grandparents. My grandfather was a missionary, and he was in Havana, Cuba, just right after the Spanish-American War, and that's where they acquired it, I assume.
Is that right? In the 1600s and 1700s, Britain was just in love with the porcelain that was being exported from China. It had beautiful underglaze, cobalt blue painted designs. And in the latter half of the 1700s, the English potters had really come into their own. So they wanted to compete with this ware, and they wanted to come up with something inexpensive. So at that time, in the second half of the 1700s, they developed a process called transfer printing.
Well, I was wondering, since it came from Havana, is it a picture from in Havana, or is it from Spain?
But the good thing is that transferware has gotten in vogue again. People are really starting to appreciate it as like little works of art, and they're using it to decorate walls and bookcases and places in their homes. So prices are pretty strong right now for transferware. In this condition, I would say if it was out in the marketplace, it would bring about $200, $250. If it was in perfect condition, it would be $400. And if we were talking maybe up in the Northeast, it could probably be as much as $700.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Wall, you have brought a beautiful presentation cup in. Would you like to tell us a little about its history?
Oh, I'd love to. This is a family piece. It's from my great-great-uncle, Henry Houston Wall, who lived in Pond, Mississippi, right near Woodville, and he gave it to his wife. It says, "To my wife." It's got the initials M-E-E-W, Mary Ellen Evans Wall, from New Orleans, I think.
We'll try and turn it around, and maybe they can see the inscription on it. Okay?
And this has been passed down through the family, and it's one of the few pieces I have, even though the family did grow up here near Louisiana, the pieces have gone different directions.
Well, it's really quite a nice thing, and frequently we hear these things called christening cups, and this is sort of proof of the pudding that this was not a christening cup, and perhaps was given to your ancestor, your ancestress by your ancestor, as a punch cup on some particular occasion or so. And you are right, indeed it was made in New Orleans, and how we know is on the bottom. We have the firm of Hyde and Goodrich as manufacturers, but what's really more important than almost the Hyde and Goodrich is the little mark K. The K is what tells us that this was actually made by a German immigrant silversmith named Christoph Christian Kukler. And Mr. Kukler worked for the Hyde and Goodrich firm and worked on his own as well, but when he made this piece, it would have had to have been made sometime between about 1853 and 1861 when the Hyde and Goodrich company went out of business. This piece could go as low as $600, but it could go as high as $1,200. So,
that's great.
And it makes it more valuable, say, than a comparable piece made in New York or Philadelphia.
Still can't retire yet,
No,
can I?
you can't retire yet. No, I'm very sorry about that.
Thanks anyway, Pat.
But it is neat.
Okay, could you tell me how you got these woodblock prints?
Well, they were given to me by a friend of mine twice. The first time, he asked me to dispose of them, and I kind of drug my feet about doing that. And so he said, well, why don't you give them to me, and I'll put them on the back burner. And before we could do something with them, he passed away, and so I ended up inheriting them. So that's rather significant to me.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know anything about them.
Japan had been closed to the West for about 300 years until about 1860 when it was opened up. And people in this country and in Europe just went crazy over Japanese things.
Yes.
And that was the inspiration for a lot of the arts and crafts movement. And in the 20s, a lot of Western artists, particularly females, went to Japan to study this technique. And this is an example of a lady who did that. Her name is Elizabeth Keith.
Yes.
She was born in Scotland in 1887 and died in England in 1956. And she spent 9 years in China, Korea, and Japan studying art. And she's had her prints in exhibitions in museums in Japan and this country and also in England. And her work comes up quite frequently at auctions in this country. Now, do you have any idea of the value of them?
Gosh, no. In fact, you're really the first person that I've talked to that was able to tell me anything about them.
Well, in today's market, retail, they would be worth $1,200 to $1,500.
Well, what a nice surprise.
And that's each.
Oh, gosh.
Where did you get this?
My stepfather had worked in Iraq on a pipeline from Beirut to Haifa, as I understand, Haifa, Palestine. The names were all different back then in the early 30s as countries. And this, as I understand it, there was some Bedouin tribes that did labor work on the pipeline. And these were rugs that they used as floors, I guess, in their tents as they moved across the desert.
Say, some of this, they were used as decoration or the door cover or as on their sitting areas, they covered them, they enjoyed every day. And then they did the flat weave because it was lighter than the pile rugs, hand knotted rugs. So it was easy to carry away to the next stop they had to go. Roll it and take with them. With the sand and the dirt, easy to keep up with that. You know, that's the reason all the tribal rugs that we see, they are woven flat. And what do you think these rugs are worth it about?
I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even guess.
Yeah, well, because there have been many, many rugs done like this, they are not any exceptional rugs. Today you can find in the market any rug dealer, a rug like this one is larger size. I say between $700 to $800 on this one. This is a narrow strip. This is probably more to the around $400, $500 price range. They're not very expensive, but because there is too many of them in the market, you know.
So this is $700, $800, and this one's $400 to $500.
$400 to $500, yes.
But that's more than I thought. I had no idea.
Well, tell me something about how you got this book. Where did you buy it?
Well, we were living in England about 6 or 7 years ago, and I came across it at a book fair, and it made me lonesome for home, so I bought it.
And it is Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was published in 1852. It's an English edition, and as you can see, it's illustrated by George Cruikshank, who was a very popular illustrator of that era. You know, this book was it was an absolute bestseller. It was really incredible when it came out. It was published first in the United States, as you would expect. It was serialized in a magazine called The National Era from 1851 to 1852, and then in 1852, the edition came out, the American edition came out, and it sold 300,000 copies. It was so popular. It was just amazing. This copy is in nice condition. It's in its, I believe, probably the first binding that was ever put on it, probably contemporary with the publication of the book. It's very nice, and I would keep it in that original binding. The book was just tremendously popular because of the anti-slavery movement, and it does deal with, the story deals with Uncle Tom, who was a very faithful servant to the people that he served, but who in the end was flogged to death by Simon Legree, an evil master, here in Louisiana. So there's a Louisiana connection as well. Have you ever had it appraised?
No, I
Do you have
haven't.
any idea what it's worth?
No, I haven't.
Well, as I said, it was very, very popular, and so there were many copies of it. So it's not really a scarce book, even though it is 150 years old. It's not really a scarce book. And through the research that I've done, I've found that right now copies of this book in comparable condition are selling for between $200 and $300. So it's very nice.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm so glad you came and brought these wonderful objects for us to have a look at today. What can you tell me about this little piece right here, and how did you come to own this?
Well, I tell you, Gail, it belonged to my grandmother, my mother's mother, who was born in 1848. So I feel that this is over 100 years old. When my grandmother died, one of my mother's old maid sisters commandeered this beautiful little thing, and she kept it until her death in 1969. And she left everything she had to her nieces and nephews. So I immediately took this because I wanted to give it to my mother, because she had always complained that she had gotten nothing from her mother. So that's why I took it, and I gave it to my mother, and she kept it from 1969 until her death in 1983. And since that time, it's been mine.
Good.
And I keep it in my bedroom on a beautiful little antique sewing table.
Correct.
And I love it. I treasure
I think it's ended up with the right person.
Oh, I do too.
Right now. This little sewing caddy was probably made around 1850, so it's pre-Civil War. And you have
Well,
to...
my grandfather fought in the Civil War. Not many people can claim that now.
That's
but my grandfather was a Civil War veteran.
Well, this was probably made right about 1850. The sewing machine didn't come into general use until about 1860, so every item of clothing was completely hand-stitched. So it would be real important that all your little tools and the necessities for that task would be kept in one convenient spot and close at hand. And hence, we have these wonderful little sewing caddies like yours. Well, let's see what I can tell you about this. Well, let's close it up. Let's do that first. This little piece is probably French. And, you know, we can see it's made of shells, and it's got this wonderful gilded brass mountings and trims. In the late 1800s, wealthy, very fluent Americans would go on these very fashionable trips to Europe and take these long tours all through Europe. And they would love to pick up little souvenirs to kind of commemorate that trip. I believe this was a wonderful Grand Tour souvenir, and it's just such a fanciful design. Let's look at how this works. Press down on the button, and it pops open. And we looked at this and said this is a lot like the mechanism used in the Fabergé eggs that we used to open the eggs. In fact, this actually forms an egg, doesn't it? So I would say that the value of this piece is also in the same neighborhood as this piece. I'd say $150 to $250.
I paid more than that for it. I think I paid about $180 for it, if I remember correctly.
Well, I said the range would be $150 to $250.
I remember at the time I thought it was terribly expensive, but I wanted it anyway.
And that's exactly how the women felt who were on those travels would feel about these very kinds of objects. They wanted them, and they wanted to bring them back as a lovely reminder. I'm really pleased that you brought them in, and I know you came all the way from Crowley.
I surely did.
So I thank you very much.
I've enjoyed my trip.
Very good.
My visit, and thank you.
Very good. Well, you take them home and put this one back by your bed.
Will do.
And keep it there.
Ms. Bourgeois, you've come from Lafayette with some family treasures, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Tell me about these.
Well, one was a gift from a friend in New England.
Which one was that?
This union case with the mother and baby. And the other is a picture of my great-great-grandfather.
Let's talk about the union case first. Do you know anything about union cases?
Not much.
Well, union cases, it talks about the material that actually holds the photograph. And it was the first commercial use of plastic. It's actually a thermoplastic. Some people call it gutta percha, but it's not. It's actually a thermoplastic or a plastic material. And they made these cases out of them, molded them in different sizes and shapes and with different motifs on them. But the thing that I like the best about your union case is what's in it, because it has in it a daguerreotype. Do you know what a daguerreotype is?
Yes.
That's the first commercial photograph. And they were invented by Louis Daguerre in France, given to the world by the country of France. They came to the United States, began to do it, and we beat everybody in these things. And so our photographs are the best in the world. But the real treasure you brought to us is this tintype of your great-great-great-grandfather?
Great-great-grandfather.
Great-great-grandfather. And what was his name?
Emile Bourgeois.
And he lived in Pointe-Coupee Parish?
Yes, sir.
Well, unfortunately, this tintype is beginning to show some signs of deterioration. It's starting to flake. And so you need to bring that to a conservator and have them put a piece of glass over it to protect it. And the case has been damaged somewhat. Do you have any idea of the value of these things?
No.
But the daguerreotype with the case, I would value at $250 to $300. And the tintype, frankly, it's in rough condition, and so monetarily, it probably doesn't have more than $50 or $100 worth of value in it. But I know it's priceless to you and to your family.
Yes, it is.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our show. We've enjoyed having friends from all across the state be with us today, from Pineville and North Louisiana and New Iberia and in Baton Rouge. It's been a real privilege to allow people across the state to bring in their treasures for us to examine and for appraisers to give us a sense of their history and value. From all of us here at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, please continue watching the Antiques Roadshow. I know I'm going home to look and see if I have any treasures in my attic. Again, thank you for joining us. Goodbye.